What if I told you that the towering, breathtaking stone cities of the American Southwest weren't built by sudden magic, but were actually woven together over thousands of survival, struggle, and a single revolutionary crop? The legendary Four Corners region of the United States stands as a silent testament to the remarkable, colorful civilization of the ancestral Puebloan peoples and those who carry on their legacy today. If you had the power to travel back to the year 1100 CE, you would find yourself surrounded by flourishing farming societies, constructing massive pueblos, digging sacred kivas, and crafting incredibly beautiful artwork and pottery. Yet this bustling world was a massive departure from what existed there just a few millennia prior. For the vast majority of human existence in the Southwest, this arid land was sparsely populated by highly mobile groups of hunter-gatherers. This begs the ultimate question: how did such a sophisticated and vibrant culture grow out of such incredibly modest beginnings? Today, we will unlock this mystery by exploring the basket maker culture, the crucial historical bridge connecting the ancient hunter-gatherers of the southwestern Archaic to the majestic ancestral Puebloans. By the time we finish, you will truly understand why the path leading to these stone cities was not paved with stone, but was delicately woven from the ground up. Before we dive into the heart of this adventure, we have to address every history lover's favorite subject: chronology. To make our lives easier, archaeologists have split this timeline into neat, manageable chapters. The eras we're going to dive deep into today are known as the Basketmaker II and Basketmaker III periods. Now, you might be asking yourself why we're skipping right over a Basketmaker I period. Interestingly, Basketmaker I is a term that modern archaeologists no longer use. Instead, this era is classified as the Archaic, which was immediately followed by the early agricultural period. Though we will touch on these formative years to set our stage, the real magic and the core transformation of our story happens during the later two Basketmaker eras, roughly between 500 BCE and 750 CE. You will definitely want to stay with us for every step of this journey, because the bizarre and ingenious ways these ancient peoples survived the ultimate test of nature and how it changed human biology and society forever is a reveal you absolutely cannot miss. Depending on which book you read or when it was published, you might find these timelines shifting slightly. Some researchers push Basketmaker II back to absorb the early agricultural period, around 2000 BCE, splitting it into early and late phases. For our journey today, we'll stick to a clear path, moving from the Archaic to the early agricultural period and then straight through Basketmaker II and III. Next, let's map out the unique geography of this world. As a quick clarification, while I will refer to this region as the Southwest, using that term is technically a bit of a misnomer. The cultural boundaries of this ancient Southwest don't stop at the modern borders of the United States. They actually extend deep into northern Mexico. So, whenever we talk about the Southwest today, keep in mind that we're also looking at archaeological sites located south of the U.S.-Mexico border.
However, our primary focus will remain anchored in the legendary Four Corners. For anyone watching from abroad, or perhaps those who need a quick refresher on American geography, the Four Corners is the precise geographic point where the boundaries of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona meet. This entire landscape is ruled by the vast Colorado Plateau, a high-altitude territory sitting mostly above 5,000 feet or 1,500 meters, characterized by its remarkably dry climate. Yet, despite being arid, this plateau is not nearly as scorched as the low desert stretching to its south. It receives a bit more precipitation, which was a vital lifesaver for early farmers, especially since the plateau's primary waterways, the Little Colorado and San Juan rivers, run through deep, steep canyons that made traditional river-fed irrigation nearly impossible. Because of this, rainfall was a wild card that fluctuated dramatically, directly dictating whether human communities would survive or starve. This rugged, rocky terrain is decorated with sweeping pinyon juniper woodlands, sagebrush, and wild grasses, with majestic ponderosa pines taking over at higher elevations. Just to the east of this plateau rise the formidable Rocky Mountains, which caught more moisture and served as a crucial treasure trove for timber and valuable stones like basalt, obsidian, chert, turquoise, and malachite. It was a beautiful but highly unforgiving environment, full of hidden potential. As we are about to see, the ancient people who called this home possessed an incredibly deep, intimate knowledge of the land and knew exactly how to extract every resource to survive. To truly appreciate their ingenuity, we must first look at the very earliest hunter-gatherers of the Southwest. This region is incredibly special because it holds some of the oldest archaeological evidence of human life in the entire American continent, proving that humans have walked these lands for roughly 20,000 years, stretching all the way back to the icy winds of the late Pleistocene. Back in those ancient times, the Southwest looked entirely different than the desert we know today. Water flowed abundantly across the surface, and the low-lying deserts of Arizona and New Mexico were lush with massive lakes, wet meadows, and roaming giants like mammoths and bison antiquus. Thick forests covered vast stretches of the territory. But as the Pleistocene drew to a close, global temperatures climbed, and the Southwest began a slow, dry transition over several thousand years. Between 5000 and 2000 BCE, the climate and plant life we see today finally began to take shape. Lands that were once rich grasslands and deep forests dried up, forcing human populations to adapt or perish. For instance, communities that relied heavily on bison hunting followed the retreating herds eastward toward the Great Plains, while the families who chose to stay behind developed highly generalized hunting and foraging strategies. In the Four Corners area, these communities were small, highly mobile, and scattered thin across the wilderness. Food sources were seasonal and widely dispersed, forcing these archaic families to travel immense distances just to gather what they needed to survive. This lifestyle demanded an encyclopedic knowledge of a vast landscape, alongside highly coordinated communication to track which plants were ripening and where game was moving at any given time. As the generations passed and populations slowly grew, food processing became much more intense. After 3200 BCE, we begin to see stone grinding tools called manos and metates showing up in the archaeological record, proving that families were finding more efficient ways to extract nutrition from wild seeds and grains.
Even so, population growth remained very slow and the region was incredibly quiet. Most archaeological sites from this era are nothing more than small, temporary campsites marked by simple fire hearths and leftover stone flakes from tool making. Fascinatingly, the tools recovered from these brief camps were often crafted from premium quality stone sourced from hundreds of miles away. This reveals that these ancient bands were either undertaking massive journeys or maintained sophisticated trading networks with distant neighbors. We must also remember that despite the outward similarity in their stone tools, these archaic peoples were likely not a single uniform group. This shared survival technology actually masks a highly diverse tapestry of distinct ethnic and linguistic families who simply used similar survival strategies. The key lesson here is that these early archaic communities were small, exceptionally mobile, and perfectly tuned to harvesting the seasonal wild riches of a massive territory. But everything they knew was turned upside down by a monumental event, the introduction of maize. This milestone was so revolutionary that archaeologists use it to draw the line between the old archaic way of life and the dawn of the early agricultural period, commonly abbreviated as the AEP. This boundary continues to shift in our history books as modern science gets better at detecting microscopic traces of ancient corn. As the wonderfully engaging archaeologist Stephen Lexon once wrote, "The exact date of corn's arrival is a southwestern grail. We seek the earliest maize like Indiana Jones sought the cup of Christ." Dr. Lexon's words are a true treasure, and they highlight just how obsessed researchers are with this mystery.
It is impossible to overstate how much maize transforms human societies, and the Southwest was no exception. Maize acts as a quiet conqueror, leaving vast green fields in its wake wherever it travels. Of course, this massive shift did not happen overnight. It was a slow, gradual evolution. To understand how it unfolded, we have to look back at the birth of corn in Mexico and its long journey north. Extensive research reveals that maize was first domesticated in Mexico around 7000 BCE, bred from a wild grass called peocinte, most likely in the fertile Balsas River Valley. From that single cradle, it slowly traveled across Mesoamerica and eventually made its way into both North and South America. By 5000 BCE, communities across Central America were actively farming it, and it slowly pushed its way northward into the Southwest. The oldest traces of corn we have found in the broader Southwest come from legendary archaeological sites like McEwen Cave, La Playa, Clearwater, Three Furs Shelter, and the brilliantly named Old Corn Site. Radiocarbon dating at these sites places this early corn between 2400 BCE and 1900 BCE. Because of this, archaeologists generally agree that maize was firmly established in the Southwest by 2100 BCE, even though most textbook literature sets the formal start of the early agricultural period at 2000 BCE. These early dates span an incredibly wide geographic area, showing that this new plant was adopted with surprising speed across the region. The fact that this tropical plant survived at all on the Colorado Plateau is a biological miracle, as the unforgiving northern climate pushed maize to its absolute evolutionary limits. Coming from the tropics, maize had to adapt to severe dryness and dramatically shorter growing seasons. While the Colorado Plateau gets a bit more rain than the low southern deserts, its rivers run too deep for easy irrigation, and the constant threat of early frost could wipe out an entire season's crop in a single night. This made early corn farming a terrifying, high-stakes gamble. Yet, over the course of 2 millennia, these ancient farmers carefully selected and replanted the hardiest seeds, slowly breeding new southwestern strains of maize that were highly resistant to drought, heat, and cold.
How exactly this crop first arrived in the Four Corners remains a subject of intense academic debate, centered around 2 main theories. The first theory suggests that the local archaic hunter-gatherers we discussed earlier chose to adopt farming from their neighbors to the south. The second theory argues that groups of experienced farmers actually migrated north into the Four Corners, pushing out the local hunter-gatherers and bringing their own unique culture and agricultural techniques with them. Believers in the adoption theory argue that taking up corn farming was a deliberate, calculated response to a growing population and shifting climates, offering a reliable food backup to supplement their wild diets. On the other hand, the migration theory suggests that Proto-Uto-Aztecan-speaking farmers marched north from central Mexico, carrying their agricultural traditions with them. While this migration theory relies heavily on complex linguistic connections and shared agricultural words, modern DNA studies have consistently failed to find any genetic evidence of a large-scale population movement from the south into the southwest. Regardless of how it got there, these early groups treated this revolutionary crop with surprising casualness at first. They did not immediately settle down. Instead, they continued to live their mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyle, keeping corn as a side project. There is absolutely no evidence of major population growth during these early centuries. Farmers likely planted their seeds in damp soils along active creeks and wet areas, leaving the crops to grow with almost no daily supervision while the families went on their seasonal hunting trips, returning only in the autumn to harvest what had grown. In archaeological texts, these early families are often beautifully described as farmer foragers. This casual approach makes perfect sense when you look at the actual corn they were growing, which looked nothing like the plump, juicy ears of sweet corn we buy at supermarkets today. Those modern varieties are the result of thousands of years of selective breeding and modern science.
This ancient southwestern maize was a tiny, small cob variety with minuscule seeds. Leftover cobs from this era are usually only about 7 centimeters long and hold just 8 to 10 rows of kernels, compared to a modern ear of corn, which easily boasts 20 rows and stretches up to 20 centimeters. In fact, renowned southwestern archaeologist R.G. Matson has suggested that these early peoples might not have grown corn for its tiny seeds at all, but rather for the sweet, sugary juices hidden inside its stalks. But even this primitive crop required a partnership with humans to survive. Domesticated corn cannot reproduce on its own. It relies entirely on humans to strip away the protective outer husk and plant the seeds. You cannot simply plant a field of corn, walk away forever, and expect it to wild colonize the area. Growing it represented a conscious, long-term commitment of physical labor and attention. This mutual partnership accelerated the plant's evolution as farmers naturally saved and replanted seeds from the crops that grew the fastest and resisted drought the best. We also find clear evidence that these early peoples were beginning to store their harvests for the winter. At the old corn site on the Colorado Plateau, archaeologists discovered numerous storage pits filled with ancient corn remains, alongside simple timber structures that likely served as temporary seasonal shelters. Ultimately, we should view these early agricultural families not as full-time farmers, but as brilliant opportunists who experimented with agriculture while keeping their feet firmly planted in the wild world.
This era has left behind a rich treasury of physical artifacts preserved Mexico-speak Tainoan or Carisan. This massive Uto-Aztecan language family once stretched in an unbroken chain from the Great Basin down through the southwest and deep into the heart of Mexico. This vast network of shared languages acted as an ancient superhighway, easing the flow of corn, trade, and revolutionary ideas from Mesoamerica directly into the north. Many scholars believe that the Western Basketmakers were actually immigrant farming families who slowly pushed north from Arizona into southern Utah, with archaeological sites growing younger and younger the further north you travel. This suggests that as southern farming populations grew, families marched north in search of fresh, uncultivated soil, eventually meeting and blending with the local hunter-gatherers of the Four Corners. In an elegant 2018 study, researchers Linda McNeil and David Schall argued that these incoming southern farmers did not conquer the locals, but instead formed incredibly close, mutually beneficial family and marriage alliances with them. This is supported by the fact that modern languages like Hopi contain ancient agricultural loanwords derived directly from southern tongues. We can even see this cultural blending painted onto the canyon walls. During this era, a magnificent new style of rock art known as the San Juan anthropomorphic style emerged on the Colorado Plateau. Experts argue this art represents a beautiful fusion of the older local Glen Canyon linear style with the Palavayu style of the South, even borrowing sacred spiritual symbols from Mesoamerica. It paints an incredibly rich, cooperative picture of different human groups coming together to master the art of survival. As these communities blended, their reliance on agriculture skyrocketed. Maize was no longer just a backup food, it became the absolute center of their survival. We can trace this diet revolution directly through the chemical signatures left in their bones. By measuring stable carbon-13 isotopes, scientists can see exactly what ancient people ate. While older bones from the early agricultural period show a diet dominated by wild plants, basketmaker bones reveal a massive spike in carbon-13, proving that their bodies were literally built out of the corn they grew. And as their dependence grew, so did the quality of their crops. Through careful selective breeding and the introduction of a fresh wave of hardy maize strains from Mexico around 1000 BCE, cobs grew larger and began sporting 10 to 12 rows of seeds. Soon, two more vital crops arrived from the south to complete their agricultural toolkit: squash and domesticated beans. The arrival of the common bean was an absolute game changer for these early farmers. Beans and corn are perfect biological partners. Bean rinds climb up the sturdy corn stalks for support, and more importantly, beans possess unique root systems that pump vital nitrogen back into the soil, naturally fertilizing the fields and keeping the land productive year after year. Combined with squash, these crops formed the legendary Three Sisters of Native American agriculture, providing a perfect, nutritionally complete diet. Yet these farmers never forgot the wild world, continuing to harvest a rich variety of wild plants like wolfberry, goosefoot, amaranth, tansy mustard, and wild potatoes, even allowing wild amaranth to grow alongside their farmed crops. They also welcomed another crucial domesticate into their lives, the turkey. At the famous turkey pen ruin site, researchers discovered ancient turkey coprolites, the scientific word for fossilized animal droppings, proving that these birds were kept in pens and fed a steady diet of farmed corn. DNA testing has revealed that these turkeys were not domesticated from local wild birds, but were actually traded into the region from deep in the plains of Texas and Oklahoma. These birds provided these settled communities with a vital source of protein, strong bones for tool making, and warm feathers for weaving blankets.
To protect these precious harvests, basket-maker communities began investing in permanent infrastructure, digging large, bell-shaped storage pits deep into the earth and constructing sturdy, semi-subterranean dwellings known as pit houses. These homes were a massive leap forward, allowing families to live year-round next to their fields to protect their crops and guard their winter food supplies. To build a pit house, families excavated a shallow pit into the earth, erected 4 sturdy wooden posts around a central fire hearth to support a heavy log roof, and leaned smaller beams against the earthen walls. This entire wooden frame was then tightly packed with branches, reeds, and a thick layer of insulating mud. A single hole was left in the center of the roof to serve as an entrance via a wooden ladder. Sturdy stone wing walls and deflectors were constructed inside to channel fresh air to the fire without blowing it out. This semi-underground design was incredibly energy efficient, staying wonderfully cool in the blistering summer heat and beautifully warm during freezing winter nights. While some families still built simpler timber structures on the surface, depending on local resources, this classic pit house design would become the architectural blueprint for the grand civilizations of the future. Around 200 CE, another major technological revolution arrived, the widespread adoption of pottery. While earlier people certainly knew how clay hardened in fire and had crafted decorative clay beads and tiny figurines for centuries, they had never used it for cooking. For a mobile hunter-gatherer, heavy, fragile clay pots were a massive liability. But for a settled farming family, pottery was an absolute lifesaver, allowing them to boil tough beans, cook stews, and seal their grain harvests away from moisture, insects, and rodents. These early basket-maker pots were simple, unadorned brown utility wares that quickly spread to every corner of the Southwest, serving as a clear archaeological marker of a society committing itself fully to a settled life. Yet, despite the simplicity of their everyday cookware, these farmers possessed a deeply sophisticated artistic world and maintained active links to the broader continent. Basket-maker graves are frequently filled with exquisite luxury goods, including beautiful marine shells carried all the way from the Pacific Ocean, carved stone pipes, dazzling quartz crystals, and exotic raw stone traded from hundreds of miles away. These trade routes were not just about luxury, they were a vital survival insurance policy, allowing communities to trade for food with distant allies whenever local crops failed. True to their historical name, they remained absolute masters of the woven arts, crafting breathtaking baskets, sandals, and bags. Before pottery took over, they wove baskets so tightly that they could hold water, sealing the fibers with a layer of sticky pine pitch.
They decorated these vessels with complex, beautiful geometric patterns dyed with natural colors, and during this era, they invented a revolutionary two-rod coiling technique that made their baskets incredibly strong and rigid, proving that as their agricultural yields grew, they constantly engineered better, stronger ways to preserve their wealth. This rich inner world was also painted and carved onto the towering canyon walls. Basketmaker rock art is an incredibly vast, sacred subject that has filled entire libraries, studied deeply by legendary scholars like Polly Shaftsma and Sally Cole. Painted with rich red, white, and yellow pigments, these ancient galleries are dominated by towering, broad-shouldered human figures with striking trapezoidal or triangular bodies.
These majestic beings are depicted wearing elaborate flowing sashes, heavy necklaces, sacred masks, and towering headdresses surrounded by clusters of stenciled handprints. We also see early depictions of musicians playing flutes, the ancient ancestors of the famous Kokopelli figure. These dramatic paintings were deliberately placed in highly visible public spaces like towering cliffs and deep rock alcoves, serving as sacred territorial markers, historical records, or spiritual maps of shamanic journeys. But these canyon walls also whisper of darker times, occasionally showing striking scenes of warfare, raids, and captured trophies. As populations grew and settled down, their stored winter food supplies became highly tempting targets for hungry neighbors, and we find clear skeletal evidence of physical trauma and violence in many basketmaker graves. This era of conflict was accelerated between 200 and 400 CE by the arrival of a deadly new military technology, the bow and arrow. This rapid, long-range weapon quickly began to replace the older, heavier atlatl, changing the face of hunting and warfare across the Southwest forever. As the centuries rolled on, this culture reached its absolute peak during the Basketmaker III period, beginning around 500 CE. During this golden age, the very first true agricultural villages began to rise across the Four Corners, cementing a fully settled way of life. Pit houses became larger and far more complex, often featuring a small entry antechamber used for storage connected to a massive main living room. Families gathered together in large, organized communities, farming expansive fields of corn, beans, and squash, and managing large flocks of domesticated turkeys. These settlements ranged from quiet family hamlets to sprawling villages boasting dozens of homes. Some of these pit houses were exceptionally large and filled with wealth, revealing that successful farming families were beginning to accumulate significant personal property. The scale of their food storage was truly mind-blowing. At Site LA 4169 on the upper San Juan River in New Mexico, archaeologists excavated massive clay-lined storage chambers capable of holding enough corn to feed 27 complete families for an entire year. Many of these villages were surrounded by heavy wooden stockades, sparking debate among modern scholars who argue whether these walls were built to defend against enemy raids or simply to keep their children, dogs, and turkeys from wandering off into the dangerous wilderness. But despite any local conflicts, these villages remained deeply connected to the wider world, actively trading high-quality stone, shimmering seashells, and colorful exotic bird feathers across the continent. This settled life also fostered a beautiful new sense of community, marked by the introduction of a new type of sacred architecture, the kiva. These massive circular underground chambers served as the social and spiritual heart of the village, hosting sacred ceremonies and community councils that kept these growing societies unified and peaceful. Directly evolved from their ancestral pit houses, these grand kivas required an extraordinary amount of cooperative community labor to build. At the Dillard site in Colorado, researchers uncovered a magnificent great kiva that had been rebuilt and refloored 3 separate times, proving that generations of villagers continued
continuously gathered to maintain and honor this sacred space. This site also featured pit houses built in completely different regional styles, proving that people from entirely different cultural backgrounds were migrating from all over the plateau to live together in these early melting pot villages. Over in Chaco Canyon, at the famous Shabakeshji village, archaeologists excavated over 100 ancient pit houses, revealing a bustling, highly successful metropolis of the ancient world.
Underwent a beautiful transformation. The old brown wares were completely abandoned in favor of sleek, durable gray pottery. Soon, artists began painting these gray vessels with delicate, striking black geometric designs. These simple, elegant black-on-white pots would become the iconic, internationally recognized signature of the great southwestern civilizations of the future. Around 750 CE, the basketmaker era drew to a close, transitioning into the Pueblo I period and the dawn of the majestic ancestral Puebloan culture. Sturdy stone homes and storage rooms rose up from the underground, built proudly on the surface to form the multi-story stone cities we recognize today as pueblos, with their ancient pit houses evolving fully into sacred ceremonial kivas. In the centuries that followed, these stone cities would capture the imagination of the world, celebrated for their jaw-dropping cliff dwellings, beautiful pottery, and timeless rock art. Sadly, these transitional basket-maker centuries are often completely ignored in popular books and TV shows, condensed into a brief sentence or two on a museum sign before skipping straight to the famous stone ruins. But this is a massive tragedy because the basket-maker story is one of the most inspiring chapters of human history, detailing how scattered, isolated bands of hunter-gatherers undertook a perilous, multi-generational journey to become highly successful farmers, master craftsmen, and creators of a beautiful, enduring civilization. They took a fragile tropical plant from Mexico and, through sheer determination and love, forced it to thrive in a dry desert, transforming their entire world in the process. The magnificent stone kivas of the Southwest did not appear by magic. They grew directly out of the warm, cozy pit houses of the humble basket makers. One cannot help but wonder if the ancestral Puebloans, sitting in the quiet warmth of their grand kivas, looked down at the earth and remembered the brave, woven ancestors who had laid the foundations of their world. That beautiful, resilient basket-maker legacy is not lost to time. It lives on, vibrant and strong, in the modern Pueblo peoples who still call the American Southwest their home.